Chapter 12, High on the Hill. I used to mark my really severe drug use by the years I couldn't remember who won the World Series. There were 3 or 4 years in there, mid to late 70s, Cincinnati Reds, twice in a row. When the fuck did that happen? How the fuck did that happen? I've always been scrupulous, over-scrupulous, about keeping records of every appearance I made anywhere. But during the breakout success after my changes, roughly 1972 to 1975, the record-keeping broke down. Anal became cocainal. As the period kicked in, we were still living the good hippie life down in Venice, but when the money began to flow, we decided to move back into a house in Pacific Palisades, way at the top of a hill, an area of the Palisades which was at the time almost entirely populated by executives from the Rand Corporation and their families. I was the town hippie, a rebellious, weird, long hair with a weird family who screamed at one another all night long and had strange people coming in and out at odd hours carrying small packages. One night, Kelly and I sauntered outside at twilight in front of the house. Across the way, there was an outdoor cocktail party going on, a gathering of suits. They had obviously come from the Rand Corporation and were having a little meeting with barbecue. They were drinking and definitely within earshot. I don't know how loaded I was, but I said quite loud enough for them to hear, "Hey, Kelly, look at all those assholes over there." A useful life lesson for an 8-year-old girl. I did tend to direct my hostility at the square world and businessmen. I really believed that the way these suits ran the world was seriously wrong. Not only were they wrong, they were ignoring people over property and profit. But I wasn't being fully understood. The people on the other side of the fence, or the street, saw me as a simplistic slogan monger, a left-wing poser. I resented that. But my artistic role, comedian, made it impossible to explain how carefully structured it was, how it sprang from profound changes that had occurred in my head as well as my heart. I felt misunderstood and self-conscious. In other words, hostile. It was during this period, in 73 and 74, that things really began to unravel. On top of the liquor, Brenda was now doing coke, plus the pills, like Valium she took to balance the coke. She was already like Jekyll and Hyde on alcohol. Add in the coke and the mix became toxic. By 74, she was having hallucinations. One time when I was on the road, she saw many, many people on the roof. She kept calling the security service to drive by and see what they were doing up there. Or she'd see mobs of people outside in our deserted suburban street. One night I came home late, unexpectedly, without calling. Brenda tried to stab me with a sword she had and just missed skewering me. She didn't know who I was. I wasn't a lot better. Once I had a long conversation in my room with 5 people who weren't there. I came out to find Brenda. "Brenda, Pat's in there, and Doug, and Jimmy Mallon, and a couple of the other guys. Could you call the liquor store? We need some beers." She said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "For the guys. We're in my room. We're listening to records and shit." And she said, "There's nobody in the house. Nobody's come here all day." We go back, look around, and the place is empty. And yet, I'd sat there seeing all those people for hours, answered their questions, asked them things, got replies, apparently. In 1973, on a trip we took to Hawaii with Kelly, the craziness hit new heights. We stayed in a hotel called the Napili Kai in Maui. I was buying eighths or quarters from a chef in a local restaurant and doing them in the hotel. It was one of those hotels where everyone had their own little cottage or condo, but of course everybody was also right next door. And here were these Carlin people fighting and yelling and threatening each other, creating this terrible fucking aura, All this horrible, out-of-control, pathetic drug use and abuse of each other. Kelly often ended up being the arbitrator between us. She was the one who said what we never did, let's save the marriage. At the Napili Kai, in the depths of this cocaine madness, she attempted an actual intervention. At 10 years old, she was going to solve everything. The trigger of it was that Brenda and I had taken knives to each other. We hadn't stuck them in each other's flesh yet, but we were wielding them. Probably not intending to use them, but making dramatic, dangerous gestures. That's when Kelly sat us down and said, "This has got to stop." She was crying and sobbing. "I have to tell you about how I feel about all this. It's my turn to talk." Then and there she wrote a contract for us which read, "You/I will not drink or snort coke or smoke pot for the next X days of our vacation. We're going to have a family vacation and we're going to have a good time." She made us sign it. It lasted all of 30 minutes. For some reason, I went in the bathroom and shut the door. Brenda accused me of doing drugs, which for once I wasn't, and went back down to the bar. So then I did have to do some, and that seemed like it for Kelly's contract. Except it wasn't. What she'd written and done was like a roundhouse punch to the solar plexus. Even if it didn't have immediate results, it had a dramatic long-term impact. From then on, I tried harder to do right. It had a more lingering effect on Brenda that she wasn't immediately conscious of. But before very long, she'd hit bottom and was getting sober. I kept going with the cocaine. A lot of cocaine. The deadly treadmill of staying awake and taking more drugs to try to put off the time when you would finally have to go to sleep, and running out and going through the rigmarole of getting more and getting it and putting off sleep time and then realizing that you couldn't go any further. It would all just come crashing down and you'd go into this deep, deep sleep. They'd have to cancel dates. I'd miss whole strings of dates. Then I'd go to the cocaine doctor in Westwood, Dr. Von Leyden. He'd write me physician notes that excused me from the concerts so we wouldn't get sued. Usually, the excuse was that I had laryngitis, which I often did, as I'd sing for 6 days straight at the top of my voice to the music I was playing. Or I would talk, whether I had company or not. Then I'd try to do a 2.5-hour concert and I would lose my voice. Part of it was the numbing from the sheer bulk of cocaine, part the things it was cut with, which anesthetized vocal cords and mucous membranes, making speech mechanically impossible. Dr. Von Leyden had an Austrian accent and a slight speech impediment. He'd say, "Yeah, you see, this cocaine you shouldn't take because it makes you whap, and when you whap, you lose your voice. You must stop whapping." I'd always agree to stop whapping, but a month later I'd be back again, all whapped out. As 1975 proceeded, things really began to fall apart. A big part of the problem was my mother. She had come out for some birthday earlier in the year and never went home. The woman who came to dinner. I knew how corrosive she could be. This time she had become Brenda's drinking buddy. Though my mother didn't drink most of her life, as she got on in years, she was 78 by now, she'd have a sip of this and a sip of that. It took away the aches and pains. But now she was pouring drinks for them both, while feeding Brenda's unhappiness and paranoia, and pushing her further into that toxic liquor, cocaine, Valium, liquor cycle. "He doesn't love you. You know he's no good. He's never been any good. If you ever leave him, come with me and I'll take care of you." In the shape she was in, Brenda had no defenses against malice like this. She sank lower and lower. By 1975, she was reduced to sitting around the house drinking wine, Mateus Rosé, which she'd order, or Kelly would order, by phone from the liquor store down the hill, 6 or 7 bottles at a time. Whenever she did actually sleep, she was terrified of dying in her sleep, she would sleep on the couch, then get up in the morning and immediately crawl to the kitchen to get booze. She couldn't walk because she shook so badly. She weighed less than 90 pounds. Inevitably, Brenda hit bottom. One night in August of 1975, we had a fight, and she got in my little white BMW 30CS and took my mother down the hill to the Santa Ynez Inn. They had drinks in the bar and left to head back. Brenda remembered waiting for the car at the main entrance, but after that, nothing. The next thing she knows, she's sitting in my car, having backed it into and through the lobby of the Santa Ynez Inn. The fire truck's there. My car's an accordion. They bring my mother home. The Santa Monica police locked Brenda up. I went down to get her, and I was able to get her out. I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not having Kelly see this anymore. I didn't yet know about bottoming out and all those other AA phrases. She said, fine, help me, which was what this was all about, begging me to help her, as I should have long before. I asked a friend at Atlantic Records to find me a lawyer. He went one better. What I wanted was simply to get Brenda off. Instead, all records of her arrest and case just disappeared from the court system. You could never call her case up for adjudication because it no longer existed. I paid for having that done. Believe me, it's by far the best way to stay out of jail. She went to St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica, which was just beginning its CDC, Chemical Dependency Center. There were 32 bottles of medication in her suitcase and a nightgown. And in 1975, they did not yet have detox. The next morning, they woke her at 6 o'clock, made her make her bed, get dressed, and go sit in lectures. She didn't know where she was. She couldn't walk. It took 2 people to hold her up, and they didn't know if she was going to make it. They were giving her anti-convulsion drugs. She had chronic malnutrition and was anemic. All she'd done for months was drink. Everything in her body was screwed up. She was diagnosed with chronic active hepatitis and given only 2 years to live. But she started to turn around, and the first thing she told me was, I cannot have your mother in the house. Obviously, I was in one of my coherent moods because I went right home, packed Mary up, and put her on a plane back to New York. Later, I found an entry in my diary for that day, a typical self-pitying Mary line. George kicks me out today. He drove me to the airport. Brenda started going to 3 meetings a day for the first year. When she got out of the hospital, she started doing a 12-step workday, where she would go down to Skid Row and rescue people and put them into facilities. She really practiced the AA thing for a long time until she realized the AA people were all sick in a different way, that they were just living out their sickness and not doing anything about their lives. But she never looked back, and the CDC couldn't have been more wrong about that, only 2 years to live. All this happened in August 75. I was never happier in my life. I never had a greater feeling of relief than to know, although I didn't have any solid proof yet, that I'd never again have to race out and take the car keys out of her hand, that I would never have to carry her out of any place, that I would never have to endure this terrible tension that went with her drinking. The 3 things, my cocaine and pot, her drinking, were hard to separate. Talking about any one of them in isolation implied the others weren't there. I knew I was to blame, too. It had been a mutual dance of death. But more than anything, I was simply glad it was over. A few years later, the Santa Ynez Inn became the Center for Enlightenment. Brenda always said that perhaps in some small way we helped that come about. 2 months after this, in October 75, I hosted the first Saturday Night Live. One of the original ideas had been that the show would have rotating hosts. Richie Pryor, Lily Tomlin, and me. But somewhere along the line that got dropped, and Lily and Richie didn't host till shows 6 and 7. Perhaps I poisoned the well a little. I certainly was full of cocaine, though I was far from the only one. To me, this counted as one of those times when I'm away from home, I can party. Bob Woodward, who wrote Wired, said that they had to break my hotel room door down, I was so coked up. Which I don't remember. It may be true. One thing I do remember is that I refused to be in any sketches. I was still hesitant about acting and told Lorne Michaels, the producer, I'll just fuck it up. Instead of hanging around through the show in sketches, give me a series of monologues of a few minutes each. Which Lorne agreed to. I think I'm the only host who's ever done that. I also wore a suit, which Woodward definitely got wrong. He claimed the network insisted that I wear a suit. Actually, I wanted to wear a nice 3-piece suit, but with a Wallace Beery dirty tee underneath. They wouldn't let me do that. Too nervous. T-shirt had to be clean. Nervous or not, they did allow me to do the God material. Maybe God is only a semi-supreme being. Everything he's ever made has died. It was fairly mild stuff, but before we were off the air, the NBC switchboard had lit up, and someone from Terrence Cardinal Cook's office was on the phone with the official complaint. My second Cardinal incident.